Good evening. Welcome to Emory University's Goizueta Business School, and our web chat tonight is on how to conquer the GMAT. I'm Nicole Hippass, the Director of Program Marketing here at Goizueta, and I'm joined by Stephanie Espy, a 2008 MBA alum from Goizueta, and also the founder of MathSP, Academic and Test Prep Coaching. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. We're going to answer them as best we can. We've got about an hour and a half here this evening, and we're going to cover a range of topics. This web chat is being recorded. We will send you the recording in its entirety, along with all the slides that you see here today, in about a week. So if you miss anything, don't worry. You're going to get this all in your email in about a week. So just a quick review of the things that we're going to cover. Just a GMAT overview and scoring. We're going to talk test prep strategy. We're going to go through some sample questions on the quantitative section and the verbal section if we have time. And then Stephanie's going to talk about a study plan on how to prep and score well on your GMAT. And then we'll talk about a GMAT boot camp as well that's coming up that might be beneficial for some of y'all. So let's go ahead and get started. And Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Let's just talk a little bit initially about what is the GMAT, how does it work, scoring, that sort of thing.
Sure. So again, thanks for having me. Goizueta was an excellent school for me. I'm so happy that I can contribute in this way. I actually love the GMAT, unlike most people watching today, but it is a test of strategy, first and foremost. So first thing is to understand how it's organized. So you'll have generally 4 different sections on the test. You have a 30-minute analytical writing section, and you have a 30-minute what's called integrated reasoning section. The integrated reasoning section is unique to the GMAT. It consists of 4 different question types. The 4 different types are the graphic interpretation, which includes graphs in the forms of tables and charts, and could be bar graphs or pie charts, etc. It includes what's called 2-part analysis, where you have 2 different sections you have to answer correctly from the first part and the second part. It includes multi-source reasoning, where you have information presented to you in an Excel type of manner, and you have to tab through different information to answer questions based on what's in that Excel chart. And then the last section is the table analysis, where you have a pretty large table with many columns and many rows. You have to analyze information presented to you in that table. So that's integrated reasoning. Then you have the bulk of the test, the meat of the test, we like to call it, the quantitative section, which is 75 minutes, and then the verbal section, which is also 75 minutes. And those are the sections that we will talk about mostly here this evening. You'll notice also that the structure of the test includes 2 8-minute breaks. And so you'll have an opportunity to get up and stretch and get a drink of water and kind of mentally prepare yourself for the next section that you'll encounter. I also want to point out this little writing device that you have. So you're not actually writing on paper. When you take the GMAT, you're writing on a legal size, yellow, spiral bound, laminated sort of whiteboard. And so they'll give you that when you get into the testing center, along with kind of a Sharpie type of marker that you have to write with. If you've never taken the GMAT before, don't fret about that. Most people say that it doesn't really affect their sort of planning and studying on going from paper and pencil to this particular laminated pad. So just keep in mind that that's what you have to write with. So your breaks are there for you to kind of just get yourself prepared for the next section. But in total, you're spending roughly 3 hours and 46 minutes, almost 4 hours taking your GMAT. The format is very interesting. So this is different from those of you who've taken the SAT or the ACT or even the LSAT or GRE. The GMAT is what's called computer adaptive, which means that really it's question adaptive. So each question that you get, which is 1 at a time, is going to, the difficulty is going to increase or decrease based on how you answer the current question that you're working on. So this test is not the kind of test where you can skip questions, you can come back to them later on. You can't preview questions ahead of time. You have to answer the question on the screen before you can get to the next question that follows. The other important thing to note about this test is that the difficulty level increases or decreases, but also the slope increases or decreases as you progress through the test. So the very first question on the GMAT for every test taker is about a 500 level question. And if you answer that question correctly, you'll get a harder question. If you answer that question incorrectly, you'll get an easier question. And that initial jump from question 1 to question 2 is the largest jump on the GMAT. So if you progress in that manner, what you'll notice is that when you get to question number 36 of 37 in the quant section and question 40 of 41 in the verbal section, that jump from 40 to 41 or 36 to 37 is the smallest jump you'll have on the GMAT. So you want to really answer these questions correctly as they appear on the screen versus rushing through them just to say you finished all 37 questions, all 41 questions. So that's really important that you know that this is not equally weighted questions, rather it's adapting. And so because it's adapting, the difficulty level adapts along with the questions that you'll see. The scoring for the writing section is from 0 to 6, and that's in half-point increments. The integrated reasoning section is scored from 1 to 8. Those are in 1-point increments. The quant and the verbal sections are scored out of 60 points, but what's the most important about the quant and verbal is not really the score so much as the percentile. So you want to pay attention to not just what your 0 to 60 score is, because the scores can fluctuate. The percentiles that relate to the scores can fluctuate from one test to the next test. What schools like Goizueta look at more so is what percentile are you ranking in the verbal section and the quant section. So look at that number more closely than you're actually looking at that actual score. And then when you put your GMAT scores together for the quant and the verbal, that combines into what's called your 800 or your total score. And so you'll want to have a pretty high score out of 800, and you want that percentile for the total score to be, fairly high as well. So that's what we are targeting to get into MBA programs.
Okay, that's a lot right off the bat, but I think that was a really thorough overview. Let's go ahead and just break down the verbal and quant sections, because that's the meat of the tests.
Yeah. So if you let's talk about the verbal section first. So the GMAT verbal section has 3 different question types, as you'll see on the slide. So the critical reasoning question type includes 12 different questions. This part of the test is probably what you're most familiar with. Taking the SAT, taking the ACT, or maybe any other test, you'll have to read a passage, and then you'll have several questions that relate to the passage that you have to respond to. The questions can vary from what's the main idea to a supporting or detailed question to looking for making an inference to something that's in the passage. But those are the types of questions that most people, if they read a lot or they have taken other tests before, don't have that much trouble with. The sentence correction part of this section is all about grammar rules. So you have about 15 or 16 of these. They're testing you on grammar rules that you probably learned somewhere in grade school at one point. Maybe forgotten the rules per se, but if you are aware of the rules such as subject-verb agreement, pronoun-noun agreement, misplaced modifiers, things like that, verb tenses, you'll do well on this test. If you haven't, if I say verb tense, or if I say misplaced modifier and you're kind of like, what does that mean? Probably means that you should brush up on your grammar rules before you sit down and tackle the sentence correction section of the test. But it's all about the rules. There's about 15 or so rules that are tested. So if you know those rules fairly well, then again, this part of the test is a little bit attainable once you have the rules in your pocket. And the third type of question here is the critical reasoning. And there are 13 or 14 of those. I think I misread that earlier. There's 12 of the 13 or 14 of the reading comprehension. There's 12 of the critical reasoning. So forgive me for earlier saying the opposite of that, but the critical reasoning section is unique to the GMAT. That particular type of question, if you've taken the LSAT loves these types of questions, and they're actually kind of fun because you can imagine yourself sitting at the dinner table, maybe for Thanksgiving with your extended family, and having a back and forth debate about an issue. That's essentially what you're doing with this part of the test. You're taking a short stimulus and you're poking holes in it. You're trying to weaken or strengthen the argument. You're trying to figure out what the flaws are in the argument. You're looking to support it. So it's all about an argument, and you can be on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. Sometimes these arguments have assumptions, and so you have to state what the assumptions are. And sometimes they have lots of flaws. You have to uncover what those flaws are. So again, imagine yourself sitting with your extended relatives and just being on opposite sides of the fence about something and how you would prove or disprove your argument or somebody else's argument, essentially what you're doing in this part of the test. So it could be kind of fun if you're like to debate or you like to poke holes in arguments. You may do this on your job already for a lot of you. Or you're sitting in business meetings, you may have discussions about something and disagree on something, and so that's what you're doing in this part of the test. So the verbal section overall consists of 41 questions in 75 minutes. So that's roughly 1 minute and 48 seconds per question if you're answering all 41 questions. But as I said before, because this is an adaptive test, it does matter that you answer the questions correctly as they appear on the screen. So it's not about answering all 41 if that means losing points early on the test. It's about answering them as they appear as they appear on the screen, even if that means you don't get to all 41 questions. And so I hope that makes sense. That's a really important strategy for you all to know. And as you take practice tests, you'll kind of figure that out as you go. It's about, did I get questions 1 through 20 all wrong and then got the last part right, which drove your score down, or are you getting those first 20 questions correctly, which is driving your score up, and then missing at that point. So that's really important that you experiment with that and figure out how to optimize your score.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Take your time, get the questions right, and get those extra points on those first questions instead of just rushing through.
Right, even if that means not getting through all, every single question in the section.
Okay. Well, we know we have a real testing coach when they talk about how fun the GMAT is. So let's move on to the quantitative part of the test and kind of giving us an overview of what that looks like.
Sure. And I will say that this is a part of the test that most people taking the GMAT do struggle with the most. I think it's normal. You've been out of school for 5, 10 years, some of you even longer, and you haven't sat in an algebra class since high school, maybe, college. So it's been a while for some of you. So again, if that's you, then don't panic. Just know that you are not alone and that a lot of people have the same issue of brushing up on these concepts and knowing how to apply the concepts to the questions. So in the quant section, there's 2 different question types. The first one is called problem solving. So there's roughly 21 of these questions. They bounce back from problem solving to data sufficiency, and you don't really know the order of the questions, until you get to the next screen. But you'll have roughly 21 problem-solving questions. These are traditional problem-solving questions where you'll have 5 answer choices, and so you solve the problem, and hopefully you see your answer there, you choose your answer, and then you move on to the next question. And so those are what people are more used to. It's the data sufficiency question type that is very different and unique to the GMAT. So there's about 16 of these types of questions. These questions are about understanding if there's enough information to solve a question. So you're given some data and you're given a question, something to answer. And so you have to figure out with the data presented to you in 2 different statements if you have enough information to answer the question. So the good news is that you don't actually have to answer the question, okay? You can stop when you know you have enough information. So that's the good news. But then the bad news is that most people, because they're used to actually solving a question fully, they don't know when to stop or how to stop. You have to train yourself to stop in the moment that you know you have enough information to answer the question. So we'll see some examples of these a little bit later. But if you haven't taken the GMAT, or even if you have, you probably want to make sure that you get to know the DS question type or data sufficiency question type really well and understand that mindset of switching back and forth between actually solving a question all the way through, like the problem solving, and then not having to do so for data sufficiency. And knowing, kind of turning your brain on and off in that way as you go through the 37 questions in this section. So with 37 questions in 75 minutes, that's about roughly 2 minutes per question that you have on average to get through all 37 questions. But once again, it's about answering them correctly as they appear on the screen. So not rushing through to answer all 37, but making sure that as you progress throughout the test that you're answering each of them correctly. Even if that means spending more than the 2 minutes, taking 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes to get something correct is a much better strategy than rushing through it, missing it, and then getting an easier question that's going to drive your score down.
All right, so we understand the format of the test. You gave some good tips already about taking your time, getting those questions right to start with. let's talk preparation strategy.
Yes.
There are a ton of GMAT prep sources out there, whether some are free, some are paid. What do you recommend? How should people prepare? What should their strategy be? What resources do you recommend?
Right, and that's an awesome question. And again, I recognize that some of you listening in today may have already taken the GMAT, or some of you have never experienced the GMAT at all, and that's okay with whichever boat you're in, whatever extreme you're in. What I always recommend that you do first is take a practice test. You always want to get a baseline score of where you are before you do any prep, because that's going to help you figure out what type of prep you need and also help you figure out how far you are from where you want to be. And even though it may not, be your ideal score, it's still a wake-up call for you. It still exposes you to the test, the format, the structure, the screens, how they work, the clicking through the questions. All of that is very good practice, and it's better to kind of jump right in and take that practice test than sort of wait a while after you get that study in. So you can easily go on the MBA.com website and download their practice test software called GMAT Prep, and then you can put that on your PC or Mac and take a online practice test that way. And that's what I recommend in terms of the practice test. Is start there, they'll score it for you, you'll get your practice test score at the end of your test, and use that score to determine your next step. So for some of you, you may be really close to your target score. You may have a high 600 score, your goal is to get to the 700s, and so you may not be very far off from where you want to be. Others of you may have a 500 level GMAT baseline score. Your goal is to jump 100 plus points to get to your target. So you really want to figure out what your baseline is, what your target is, and how far apart or close together those two scores are. If they're relatively close together, all you may need is the official GMAT book, which I have in front of me. So this is the 2018 official GMAT study guide book. You may need to sit down with this book and do some self-study to increase your score. You can do that one-on-one, or you can get a few hours of maybe some private coaching to hone in on some of the areas where you feel the weakest, and that will be maybe all you need to get your score to where you want it to be. If you're pretty far off the mark and you have 100 plus points to go, then that may be the type of person that should think about not just doing self-study and getting this official GMAT book, but also considering some type of course, whether you do an online course, whether you do an in-person course, or whether you opt into maybe one-on-one private coaching to get you that one-on-one attention. So there's lots of options out there. I know me personally, I learn better face-to-face with someone, right. So I would, much rather form a study group with some of my friends I know that are taking the GMAT and getting together and having a group that we kind of help each other out, or taking something in person. But a lot of people don't have that flexibility to do that. Maybe they travel or whatnot, so doing something online is more feasible for them. So there's great online opportunities as well. So I think it's what fits your schedule, but more importantly, choosing the right path for you really depends on how far off you are from where you want to be. And what do you think is going to be the best way to get to where you are? It is an investment, I will say, to invest in taking courses and getting the coaching that you need, even getting the material, the book that you need. It definitely is an investment on the front end, but can certainly be the difference between, getting into Goizueta and even getting perhaps scholarships as well. So
that's a good point.
I think you definitely want to make the investment, and that will help you tremendously in getting to your target score.
Compared to the investment that you're putting into getting your MBA, this is really just a small start to that.
Absolutely. And I think the people that do extremely well in the GMAT definitely have had some kind of preparation, usually a coach or someone to help them get through it. So, it's not uncommon to have to do that to bump your score up.
Sure.
And I also will say that once you have your baseline score, you kind of figure out how far you are from your target score. Go ahead and look on the GMAT website and figure out where the testing centers are that are close to you, and also figure out what the dates are that are available for you, because you may think that you can walk in and take the GMAT any day, which in most cases you can, except for when, of course, it's full, right? So there are different peak periods throughout the year that fill up really quickly. So if you want to take the test 2 months from now, 3 months from now, just kind of look at the calendar and see what it looks like. And I would say go ahead and commit. Go ahead and lock in the date, register for that date. That way you have something on the calendar you're working towards, it makes it all the more real. I know it makes it a little bit scary to lock that date in.
Yeah.
But depending upon how far you are from your target score, I think it's a good idea to set aside a month, 2 months, maybe even 3 months or less, depending on where you are, and then lock in the date and go ahead and know that, put that on your calendar and then work towards that date.
Yeah. So yeah, I would add on to that, just be mindful of what your application deadlines are when you're looking to submit your application, because the GMAT is one part of that, and so make sure that you're planning appropriately to take your test before you submit the rest of your application as well.
For sure. And also plan to take it more than once. I think some people don't think that they may have to, they have to take it several times, but first of all, business schools don't really care how many times you take the test per se. They just want your highest score. So if you take it 2 or 3 times, that's perfectly normal to do that. Obviously, you want to take it one time and get your target score in the first sitting. Most people, that it saves you money, saves you time, and you can. A lot of people can do that. But keep in mind that when you plan for your GMAT and you plan with your application deadlines, give yourself some cushion there in case you have to take it a second time, so that you can get that second time in before your deadlines as well. And know that you can take it, if you take it, you have to wait, I think it's about 2 weeks or so to take it a second time. So you can't just go back and take it again the next day or the next week. You have to wait a little bit of time in between to take it again, and no more than 5 times in one 12-month period.
Okay, good tips. Can you hold the book up one more time and let folks know what resource that is?
So this is the official, it's called the GMAT Official Guide. It's a 2018, it's pink and black. This is the best resource out there because it's actually written by the GMAC, the Graduate Management Admissions Council. So it has retired GMAT questions in here, and these are the questions that you want to master before actually going to take the GMAT. If you have a version of this book, maybe 2017 or 16, perfectly fine. The books don't change very much from year to year, so don't feel like you have to get the 2018 if you have a previous version. I think I have probably 6 versions of this book. And I promise you that from one version to the next, the change is minimum. So you'll be okay with an older version of this book. But make sure that your book does have integrated reasoning in it. So that's the only key. And integrated reasoning you can find, they give you a website at the end of the book where you can pull up those integrated reasoning questions.
Great. So we did have a question come in. They want to know, how should they decide between taking the GMAT and the GRE? So I know today we're tackling GMAT, but you're a testing coach, so you know all about both sides.
Yes. So that's a great question, and it's it's not a one size fits all thing. The short best answer is to take a practice test for both. Right? You can go on MBA.com, download the GMAT prep software, and take a practice test for the GMAT. You can go to the ets.org/GRE website, download the Power Prep 2 software, and take a practice GRE. I believe that after you take a practice test for both, you will have a very, very good sense of which one resonates more with you. So that's what I recommend for those of you that are straddling the fence about which one you may want to take. I will say that there's a lot of differences between the two. The biggest for the verbal section is the question types, of course. So on the GRE, you're tested more on vocabulary than you're on the GMAT. So if you have a very strong vocabulary, if you know, 8-letter words, 10-letter words, for example, because you'll have questions there where you'll have to fill in the blanks with different words. And you'll have to know the meaning of the words, looking at prefixes and suffixes, the root words, to be able to determine what a word means if you don't know what it means already. So taking words apart and looking at the components of a word can help you decipher its meaning. So that's the GMAT. The GRE verbal section is heavy vocab. You have reading comp like you do in the GMAT. You have what's called sentence equivalence, which is choosing the 2 words that give the sentence the same meaning. And then you also have a third type of question where you have to fill in the blanks, 1 blank, 2 blank, or 3 blanks with the proper word. For the GRE quant section, I would say it's somewhat similar to the GMAT quant section in terms of the concepts tested, but the question types are a little bit different. So the GRE, you don't have that data sufficiency question type like you do on the GMAT, but you do have a lot more tables, charts, graphs, analyzing data in a table, chart, or graph, and you also have free response type questions where you have to solve a question with no answer choices and then type in your answer. So if you solve a question, you get 5, you put in the number 5, you don't have A, B, C, D, E to choose from. But the good news about the GRE is that you can skip around and come back to questions. So that is one feature of the GRE that makes it a little bit maybe better, but the GMAT, you can't do that. So there's differences between the two. I definitely suggest, if you're curious about the GRE, to take a practice test.
Can you tell folks again, if the practice test, where to go for each?
Yes, so for the GMAT, you're going to mba.com, and you're going to download the GMAT prep software. You should be able to see it on the home page where it says download the GMAT software or practice for the GMAT, and then you can find the link. If you can't find the link, certainly email me and I can point you in the right direction. And then for the GRE, it's the ets.org/GRE. And that will take you to the ets.org GRE page. Again, that software is called PowerPrep 2. You can download that to your PC or your Mac and have that on your laptop. And so again, if you can't find that, feel free to email me and I can send you the direct link to both those practice tests.
Great. So we're going to move on right now, and we're going to actually tackle some sample questions. We are going to talk a little bit more about study plan, creating a study plan, and how to prepare a little bit further later on in the chat. But we've got Stephanie here, so let's use her and dive into some of these test questions. So we're going to start with quantitative. We're going to run through a few of those. If time permits, we'll jump into some of the verbal test questions as well.
Great. So before we get into actual questions, I just first want to show you this slide that has the different types of concepts tested. So as I said before, the GRE and the GMAT do have similar concepts tested. So you have your arithmetic concepts. You'll see here things like percents and integers and prime numbers and factors and things like that. You have your algebra concepts, things like solving equations with one variable and two variables, probability, permutation, combination, etc., slopes and slope intercepts. And then you have geometry concepts, lots of circles and triangles and quadrilaterals and different shapes, lines and angles, etc. So again, there's good news to this, is that there's no calculus, there's no trigonometry, there's no higher level math. This is math up to probably 10th grade for most people. So if you can go back to your younger self and hone in on the things you learned in your high school, you'll hopefully remember some of these things. But it does take time. If you haven't seen, Pythagorean theorem for a while, it may, when I say that, it may scare you a little bit, and that's normal, I will say. But the more you get into it and start refreshing yourself on these concepts, the better you're going to feel about the GMAT. I promise you that. And then once you get past the hurdle of the concepts, then it becomes more the strategy of how do you tackle the question. You have your concepts, you have your toolkit, then it's like, okay, what tool do I need to answer the question that's presented before me? So as we go through the questions, you'll see on the screen the difficulty level of the question as well as the concepts tested. And each question tests you on more than one concept. So it's not just, here's a question that only tests you on this one thing. There's a lot of concepts intertwined together. And so as you get more difficult, the concepts merge together and you'll see lots of things coming together. So we'll talk about how to take these questions apart and really dig into what they're trying to ask us here. So
all right,
I'll go up on the board.
Yeah, we'll have you move to the whiteboard. And just again, folks, we are going to send out this video in its entirety as well as the slide deck and Stephanie's contact information. So if you can't get enough of this, like Stephanie, you'll have her as a resource. All right, so the first sample question is a problem solving PS 175, and this is a high 500, low 600 level question. So I'll go ahead and read it out and stop me when you want me to stop.
Okay.
If P is the product of the integers from 1 to 30.
Okay, we'll stop there. So already we see this word product, and so again, you have to know the terms and what they mean. So product, if you remember, means the multiplication. So we're multiplying. P is going to be the multiplication of 1 times 2 times 3 all the way times 29 and times 30. It says from 1 to 30 inclusive. And the word inclusive is important because that means including the 1 and including the 30. So we have this list of integers that we're multiplying, and that product is what P equals. It's important to realize that for me to state that there is no calculator on the GMAT. So we cannot take out our calculator and actually figure out what this large number is for P. So know that there is a shorter way to do this, a type of question like this without actually having to multiply all these numbers together to get P. We simply just want to know what P represents, and then we'll be able to move on from that. But we have no calculator to use, so we're not going to bother actually trying to calculate what that product equals. Okay, continue.
All right, so if P is the product of the integers from 1 to 30 inclusive, what is the greatest integer k for which 3 to k is a factor of P?
Okay, so there's a lot of jargon here. And most people who miss the question because of the last part, the jargon. So it says integer k. So again, an integer is a whole number. So for example, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are integers. Something that's not an integer would be like a decimal or a fraction. So k is some whole number. Where it says 3 to the k written like this is an exponent. So hopefully you know what exponents are. And an exponent tells us how many, in this case, how many 3's we have. So k represents the number of 3's, okay, how many 3's we have that are factors. Another word for factor is divisor. So how many 3's can divide into or factors of this really big product P? So if I can rephrase the question, what we're really trying to figure out here is how many 3's, right? That's what K tells us, how many 3's can divide into this product P. So if you understand the jargon or the language of the test, and if you understand that what they're really asking you for is counting the number of 3's that can divide into P, it makes the problem a lot simpler to look at. And so when we look at this P up here, and we're trying to count the number of 3's that are factors of P, the numbers that we have to really be concerned with are the multiples of 3, the numbers that can divide by 3. So if I look at the product P, I know that 3 divides by 3, 6 divides by 3, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, and 30. These are the only factors of P that divide by 3. So now, in order for me to figure out how many 3's there are inside the P, I have to take each of these factors and divide them out to figure out how many 3's I have inside of P. So obviously there's a 3 there. When I look at 6, there's a 2 and a 3, so there's another 3 there. When I look at 9, there's a 3 and a 3, so there's 2 3's there. When I look at 12, there's a 3 and a 4, so there's a 1 3 there. 15 is 3 and 5, so there's a 3 there. 18 is 3 and 6 is 2 and 3, so there's 2 3's there. 21 is 3 and 7, so there's a 3 there. 24 is 3 and 8, so there's a 3 there. 27 is 9 and 3, and 9 is 3 and 3, so there's 3 3's in 27. And then lastly, 30 is 3 and 10, so there's a 3 there. So when I factor out all of these multiples of 3, and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I realize that K, or the number of 3's, is 14. So kind of to summarize this question, is it's really asking you, really a simple question, is to take these multiples of 3, factor them out to figure out how many factors of 3 you have inside of P. And I think that if you look at it this way, hopefully it becomes more simple to read. But again, knowing what the terminology is in the question, understanding what the word integer is, understanding what K represents in terms of how many 3's we have, knowing that factor is the same thing as divisor, which is asking you how many 3's can you divide into this product, and then counting those 3's out is the way to tackle this question. And really, if you look at it this way, it can take you under that 2-minute mark that you have to answer a quant question.
All right. Well, it's just that easy, right?
and this is a 500 level question, so this could be the first question you see on your GMAT, so I hope that's not too scary for you. But with more practice, if you're kind of like, oh my gosh, again, calm down, because most people feel that way in the beginning. And the more practice you have with these types of questions and factoring things out and looking at the terminology here, the easier it's going to get. I promise you that.
All right, so while you're erasing that, I'll go ahead and put on the screen the next sample question that we are going to cover. And this is a problem-solving question number 211. It's a high 600s question, so we're upping it a bit here. And the concepts tested are average, median, translations, and maximizing. So 7 pieces of rope have an average arithmetic mean of 68 centimeters and a median length of 84 centimeters.
Okay, let's stop there because, again, there's a lot of words in there. There's a lot of things that we have to understand. So you told me I had 7 pieces of rope. So I'm just going to represent the pieces of rope with lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here are my pieces of rope. And you said that the median was what?
The average arithmetic mean of 68 centimeters and a median length of 84.
Okay. So if I take these 7 pieces of rope and I add them all together, and then I divide by 7, because there's 7 pieces, my average will be 68. So that equals 68. And I know that the median represents the one right in the middle. So the median would be here. And so this piece of rope is 84 centimeters. I don't know these first 3 pieces. I know the last 3 pieces, but the one in the middle is 84. And when I see an expression or an equation like this, the first thing I want to do is move the 7 on the other side. So we can multiply both sides of this equation by 7. So what we really have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of rope equaling, I'm going to move this out my way, equaling 7 times 68, which is 476. Okay? So if I multiply both sides of the equation by 7, then the 7 will cancel, and I multiply that, and I'll get 476. So if I add up my 7 pieces of rope, my sum will be 476. So that's what we're given so far. So let's see what happens next.
All right, so if the length of the longest piece of rope is 14 centimeters more than 4 times the length of the shortest piece of rope.
Okay, so I'm just going to pretend like I put these pieces of rope in order from the shortest to the longest. So this longest piece of rope is 14 more than 4 times the shortest. So I'm going to just assign S to be the shortest. The variable S represents the shortest piece of rope, which means that the longest piece of rope is going to be 14 more. So I'm going to add 14 to 4 times the shortest. So that's going to be represented by the expression 4S plus 14. That's 14 more, that's the plus 14 part, then 4 times, which is 4 times the shortest length, which is S. So now we have a representation of the shortest piece, of the median, and of the longest piece. And we know that all 7 pieces have to sum to give us 476.
All right, so what is the maximum possible length in centimeters of the longest piece of rope?
So we want to maximize the longest piece of rope. So the important thing to think about here is when you maximize something, you have to do what to the other components? Minimize, right? So we're going to maximize this longest piece of rope. The other pieces here, we want to minimize them. So that way, if these are as small as possible, then this is going to be as big as possible, as long as possible. So we have to ask ourselves, we have 4 pieces of rope here that we don't have a representation of yet. But with the goal in mind to minimize these pieces of rope, knowing that 84 is the median, and knowing that S represents the shortest length, we can fill in these 2 blanks here with S and S. The reason why is because they have to make them as small as possible, they can be equal to the shortest length. So essentially these first 3 pieces can be all the same length. There's nothing that says that they have to be bigger than the shortest length. So to maximize the longest piece, we need to minimize these pieces. So the first 3 are going to all have the same length. That's the smallest they can possibly be. Once we hit the median, these last 2 pieces after the median cannot be S because they have to be at least the same as the median. So the smallest that these pieces can be are 84, and 84. That way we have this minimum, then we've minimized these 4 pieces, which means we're going to maximize the longest piece. So now we have an equation that we can actually solve. So we count our s's here. We have 3 s's here. We're adding to that 3 84s, so 3 times 84, and that's going to equal, and then we're going to add on to that 4s plus the 14 to equal the 476. So now we have a simple algebraic equation that we can use and solve. We can combine our like terms, so combine the 3s and the 4s. That gives us 7s. If I do my math correctly, that's going to give us 12, 24, 252 plus 14 equals 476. And then once we combine like terms and solve for s, let's go ahead and do that. So 252 plus 14, no calculator, so that's going to be 662. And then move the 266 over to the other side. That's going to give us 7 s's. Hopefully you can see this at the bottom. And that's 210. So therefore s is going to be 30. Okay? So now we've solved for s, which is the shortest piece of rope. We plug in the s into the 4s plus 14. So plug in the 30 into this expression for s. We get 4 times 30, which is 120, plus the 14 equals the 134. So 134 is the maximum length for this piece of rope.
Wow. All right. That was a tricky one for me, who hasn't taken this kind of math since probably 10th grade.
Right.
But now that you break it out, it seems pretty simple.
Yes. I think for this question, what most people struggle with on this particular question is the part I did up here. It's trying to figure out how to assess these other pieces of rope and thinking through how to maximize this longest piece of rope. Once you get past this part, once you have your math skills brushed up a little bit, the actual solving the equation part should be fairly simple for you. The math you can do, on your scratch paper, or you can do it and without careless mistakes, you'll get to the right value for s. However, it's just the understanding of how do I maximize the longest piece without knowing what to do with the other pieces of the rope. So hopefully that helps you to understand if you maximize one thing, you have to minimize the other things to really figure it out.
All right.
Okay.
Next question. This is another problem-solving question, PS 219. I'll go ahead and let you get that fully erased before.
All right, we're ready.
All right. If a 2-digit positive integer has its digits reversed.
Okay, let's stop there. So I have a 2-digit. So again, I see this word digit. Like, what does this word mean? I don't understand what a digit is. So remember, a digit represents a place value. So for example, the number 543 has 3 digits. And the 5 is in the hundreds place value. The 4 is in the tens place value. And the 3 is in the ones or the units place value. So each of these digits has a place value. That's really important, especially for this question. Okay, so we have a 2-digit. So 2 digits, I have 2 blanks. So I have my tens digit. I'm going to represent that with a T because I don't know its value. And I have a units digit represented by U because I don't know its value. So T and U. And then we're going to reverse the order. So if I reverse this, it's going to be U, T. So I have this number. It could be 12, 15, whatever number I want. If I reverse it, reverse 12, I get 21. Reverse 15, I get 51. So I'm going to reverse the digits. So that's represented this way. Okay?
Okay. So if a 2-digit positive integer has its digits reversed, the resulting integer differs from the original by 27.
Okay. So we just learned that these two differ by 27. So in order to subtract these two, because differ is the same thing as subtract, right? How much they differ by, you use the operation of subtraction. So to subtract TU from UT, we have to represent each of the digits with its place value, right? So going back to this example here, if I wanted to write out 543, I couldn't just do 5 plus 4 plus 3, because obviously that's not 543. What would I do? I would do 500 plus 40 plus 3. That's how I get 543. Similarly here, if I wanted to add figure out the representation of TU, I would multiply the T by the 10 because that's a 10th place value. And then, of course, the U by 1. So this is represented by 10T plus U. And then the second one is represented by 10U plus T. So now that I've written out each of these 2-digit numbers with their place values, I can subtract the 2 and then set that equal to 27. So I have 10T plus U minus, parentheses, 10U plus T, and that's going to equal 27. So now remembering to distribute my negative inside the parentheses, that gives 10T plus U minus 10U minus T equals 27. Combining like terms, so 10T minus T is 9T's, and U minus 10U is minus 9U equals 27. At this point, hopefully you notice that these three coefficients have a common factor, which is 9. So you can divide everything by 9 to simplify. And so then you end up with T minus U equals 3. So the question's asking for,
by how much do the 2 digits differ?
so the 2 digits, one being T, one being U, we see here that they differ by 3 because the difference between the 2 digits equals 3. So that's what they were looking for. So we don't have to figure out T and U individually. We just need T minus U or U minus T. We don't have to know them as individual values. So starting off with place values, representing digits with their proper value, subtracting the 2, setting it equal to 27 because that's the difference, and then doing the algebra from that point will lead us to what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, great. And that was a low 700s question.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to move on to another one. This is another problem-solving sample question. It's PS 221, and it is a mid-700s level question, and it deals with the concept of probability.
All right.
So, Xavier, Yvonne, and Zelda each try independently to solve a problem.
Okay, so I got 3 different people here, so I need to make sure I write each of them out. I'm going to call Xavier X, I'm going to call Yvonne Y, I'm going to call Zelda Z. And they're trying to do something independently, which is good, right? Because they are working by themselves, so they're not, their level of success does not depend on the other person. So the word independent is really important here to know that their success does not have anything to do with anybody else. Okay? All right.
All right, so if their individual probabilities for success are 1/4, 1/2, and 5/8, respectively, what is the probability that Xavier and Yvonne, but not Zelda, will solve the problem?
Okay, so I want Xavier and Yvonne to solve. So I want the 1/4 and the 1/2 because I want them to actually solve the question carefully. But then I don't want Zelda to solve it correctly. So if not Zelda, I have to consider the other part of this 5/8. So if 5/8 chance that she's going to have success, then the not is going to be 1 minus the 5/8. So if we subtract the 5/8 from 1, which is the whole, then there's a 3/8 chance that she won't solve the problem. Because there's really only 2 outcomes here. Either she solves it correctly or she doesn't solve it correctly. There's no other options, right? So these 2 options must sum to give us 1. So there's a 5/8 chance that she solves it correctly. That means there's a 3/8 chance that she's not going to solve it correctly. And I don't really need the chance for not solving correctly for Xavier and Yvonne because we want them to solve it correctly. But if the problem had read differently, we may need to know that Xavier's chance for not solving it correctly is 3/4, and Yvonne's chance for not solving correctly is 1/2. But we were concerned about the two probabilities here as well as the chance that Zelda will not solve. So whenever you want these things to happen in a certain way, you want this and this and this. The key word there is and. We're going to multiply the fractions by each other. So we're going to take the 1/4, multiply the 1/2, multiply the 3/8, and that's going to give us our answer, which is 3 over 64. So this is a chance that Xavier and Yvonne will solve, but not Zelda. So in this case, it's making sure that you have a representation of the problem. I like doing tables and graphs because they help to organize the problem visually. And so a lot of us are visual learners, so having it organized in a table just helps you to hopefully understand where the numbers belong, what they represent. And then from that point is figuring out what values do you need to actually get to what you're trying to get to. In this case, Xavier and Yvonne solving correctly, but not Zelda. All right, and I think we have one last problem-solving question, then we'll move on to data sufficiency.
Yep, we sure do. So the next problem-solving question is PS 222. It is a mid-700s level question, and it tests the concepts of adding and subtracting fractions with variables in the denominator.
Awesome.
All right, so 1 over x minus 1 over x plus 1 equals 1 over x plus 4.
Awesome. And so the question is to solve for x, right?
Yep, in the equation above, x could be.
Right, so we have different choices. So let's go through and list out our choices here. So what is choice A?
A is 0.
0. B?
Negative 1.
C?
Negative 2.
D?
Negative 3.
And E.
Negative 4.
Awesome. So the reason why I wrote these choices out here is because in a question like this, we can do a method called backsolve. And backsolve is awesome when you have variables in the question like this, that you can simply take the values in the choices and plug them back into the question and see which one works. Only one of them is going to work. So I could solve this algebraically, getting common denominators and kind of going that route, but I promise you that will take a lot longer than simply taking the choices and putting them back in and seeing which one is actually going to work. So first things first, the rule that we can never have 0 in our denominator. So having something over 0, no matter what's in the numerator, you can never have a 0 in your denominator. This is called undefined. So automatically I know x cannot be 0 because that will leave us with 1 over 0 here. So I can eliminate A off the bat. Similarly, for the second fraction, if I made x negative 1, I will have negative 1 plus 1, which will give me a 0. So once again, I'll have 1 over 0, and that also will be undefined, so we can eliminate choice B. And then lastly, if I plug in a negative 4, I'll have negative 4 plus 4. That will go to 0. I have 1 over 0 here. So answer choice E is also out. So I love when this happens because now really I only have 2 possible choices. So if I had to make an educated guess, I would guess C or D. But what we can do is plug in one of these options into the equation. And if that option doesn't work, then it has to be the other option because there's only 2 options left at this point. So I'm going to plug in negative 2. If negative 2 doesn't work, I know it's going to be negative 3 and vice versa. So if I plug in negative 2, that will give negative 1/2 minus 1 over negative 2 plus 1 equals 1 over negative 2 plus 4. So simplifying this, that gives negative 1/2 minus 1 over, and negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, equals 1 over negative 2 plus 4 is positive 2. Okay, keep going. So that's negative 1/2. 2 negatives make a positive. So that's plus 1 equals 1/2. And indeed, 1/2 does equal 1/2, which means this was the correct value for x. So choice C works. So if choice C works, then choice D obviously is not going to be correct. If choice C did not work, then obviously we would have chosen choice D, negative 3. But this is a nice problem to illustrate the point of back solving. There's several problems in the GMAT where you can take the choices, plug them into the problem, and solve and see which one works. Once you figure out the one that works, you don't have to bother with the other choices because you can only have one correct answer. So, and also note that because this is, it's actually a high-level problem, so 700-level question that we've hopefully, you see how simple it can be if you use this strategy. If we had using the algebra strategy and kind of worked through this using common denominators and figuring out this algebraically, it would have obviously led to the right answer, but it would have been a lot more possibilities for making careless mistakes and a lot longer process of getting to the correct answer.
Okay. So next we're going to talk about data sufficiency, and we have some questions on that we're going to talk through.
Awesome. So before I get to the questions, I wanted to first walk through the answer choices. And these are, if you're not familiar with data sufficiency, your biggest initial hurdle will be understanding what the answer choices mean. If you've taken this GMAT before, you probably know this like the back of your hand already. But if you haven't, no sweat. I promise you, you'll learn this pretty fast because you have really no choice. So you'll see on your on the presentation here that choosing choice A means that statement 1 by itself is sufficient to answer the question. So we'll talk about what that means in a second, but just know that A represents statement 1 is sufficient. Choosing choice B means that statement 2 alone is sufficient to answer the question. Choosing choice C means that you need both statement 1 and statement 2 to answer the question correctly, And then choosing choice D means that 1 and 2 independently are enough to answer the question. So you can use 1 or 2, they both work to answer the question, and you don't need them together. And then lastly, choice E means that you don't have enough information. Having both statements even together is still not enough to answer the question. So that's when you choose choice E. So it's important here that you know this, like I said, inside and out. And if you look on the next screen, the next slide shows you how to eliminate answer choices. This is a really important graph here. If you're not familiar with how to eliminate choices, this is going to be a very powerful tool. So you'll notice that the initial question you want to ask yourself is statement 1 sufficient? You'll have on the left side of that, you see the AD, BCE. So we always align our choices in that way because you'll see why in a second. So you have AD on top of each other, and then you have BCE next to it, and then on the right side, the same thing. But if the answer to your first question is yes, statement 1 is sufficient, the first thing you want to do is eliminate B, C, and E. All three of those choices are eliminated off the bat because statement 1 was sufficient. So at this point, your answer can only be A or D. That's it. 50-50 chance here. And then you move on to the next statement, statement 2. You read that statement, and if you think statement 2 is enough as well to answer the question, then you choose choice D. If statement 2 is not enough, you choose choice A, and you're done. That's it. Now, the flip to that is if you read question statement 1 and it's not sufficient, now we're on the right side of the graph. If it's not sufficient, then we eliminate choices A and D, and now we have 3 left, B, C, and E. You read statement 2. Is that sufficient to answer the question? If so, you choose choice B, and you're done. You eliminate C and E. The answer is B. If it's not sufficient, if statement 2 is not sufficient, you eliminate choice B, and now is the only time where you consider 1 and 2 together. So your next question is, okay, if statements 1 and 2, if I have both pieces of information together, is that going to be enough to answer the question? If so, you choose choice E. And if not, you choose choice C. If not, you eliminate C and choose choice E, which means you don't have enough information. So that's a lot of information. If you've never seen this before, again, don't worry about it too much. We'll send this to you so you have it. Yep. And just know that this is going to be really important for you to eliminate, whether you eliminate A, B, A, D, or whether you eliminate B, C, or E, depends upon how you answer statement 1. Now, let's just say, for example, you feel like statement 2 is easier to start with. It's okay to start with statement 2 versus statement 1. So your initial question would be, is statement 2 sufficient to answer? In that case, instead of AD, BCE, you'll have BD, ACE, because you're starting with statement 2. So BD, ACE will be the situation where you're starting with statement 2. But most cases, you start with statement 1, so it's AD, BCE all day. AD, BCE should be like in your head as you go to bed at night. AD, BCE, AD, BCE, AD, BCE. So we're going to use that to do the next set of questions. So I'm going to come back up.
That's a really powerful strategy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do a data sufficiency sample question. This is DS 307. It's a 500 level question. So, is 4 to the x plus y equal to 8 to the 10?
Okay, so notice I have my AD-BCE, like I have for every DS question on the side. And this G is my shorthand for given. So I like to write out actually, it should be up here because there was really nothing given. So we didn't really have given in this question, but we do have a find. So G is given and F is find. So nothing was really given in this particular question, but we're trying to answer the question. We're trying to find, is 4 to the x plus y equal to 8 to the 10? And that's the question. So before we look at statements 1 and 2, we want to ask ourselves, can we simplify this information? And answer in this case is yes, we can. So whenever you have exponents like this, you want to think about getting the exponents to have the same base. Right now, we have a base of 4. We have a base of 8. So they're not the same. So how can we rewrite those bases so that they are the same? So we know that 4 is the same thing as 2 squared. And we know that 8 is the same as 3 squared. Sorry, 2 cubed. So if I rewrite the 4 as 2 squared and rewrite the 8 as 2 cubed, they'll have the same base, the base of 2. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to plug in 2 squared for 4. So 2 squared, I'll keep the x plus y exactly where it is. I'm going to plug in the 2 cubed for 8 and keep the 10 exactly where it is. Okay, and written this way, now I can simplify this to be 2 to the 2x plus 2y. Does that equal 2 to the 30? And then because now I have the same base on both sides of the equation, what I really want to know is, does this exponent 2x plus 2y equal to 30? So I can carry that down. Does 2x plus 2y equal to 30? Or better yet, if I divide by 2 and simplify, does x plus y equal 15? So notice I've gone from exponents to a simple equation. Does x plus y equal 15? So in this case, this is a yes or no question. Either yes it does or no it doesn't. So we need to go to our statements and figure out with the statements, can we answer this question yes or no? Or do we need more information? So at this point, we're ready for statement 1, which I'll do with the green marker. So statement 1
X
says what?
minus y equals 9.
Okay.
X minus y.
X minus y. All right, so given x minus y equals 9, can I answer this question that does x plus y equals 15? Well, given this equation, I can't solve for x, I can't solve for y, so I don't know x and y separately. So because I don't know x and y separately, I cannot tell you if the sum of the two is going to be 15 or not. So this is what we call insufficient data. There's not enough here to answer this question. Okay? There's not enough here to answer this question, so because it's insufficient, we eliminate A and D. And now we're ready for statement 2.
Y divided by x equals 1/4.
Okay, and it's the same if I cross multiply. That's like saying x equals 4y if I cross multiply this equation. So once again, I have an equation that relates x and y together, but I can't solve for x and for y, right? There's no way to actually solve for the values of x and y to be able to answer this question. So once again, this is also insufficient to answer the question, so I eliminate choice B. So now that I've eliminated A, D, and B, so now I'll go to, could it be C? If I combine 1 and 2 together, is that enough to answer the question? So if I combine x minus y equals 9 and x equals 4y, if I combine these equations together, can I solve for x and for y? And yes, you can, because with 2 equations and 2 variables, you can solve. And notice that we don't actually have to solve, right? The key here is knowing that you can solve for x and you can solve for y. And once you solve for x and for y, you can plug in here, and then you can answer the question yes or no. So therefore, I choose C. Statements 1 and 2 together are sufficient to answer the question. I don't actually need to do the work. I stop at the point where I know that I've done enough to answer the question, and knowing that I can solve for x and for y is enough for me to stop and move on to the next question.
Great tip, great reminder. We don't have to solve the equation. We simply have to decide if there's enough information.
Right, and I think that this is the part where most people kind of get hung up on because they actually want to do the solving. They want to get x and y. They want to see if it actually does equal 15. The key here is that we don't care. We know we can answer the question. Either yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. I don't really care which way it is. I just know that I'll get to one or the other, and I'll be able to say firmly yes or firmly no. So that means I'm sufficient. That means I have enough information. I don't actually need to do the work.
All right, so let's move on to another data sufficiency question. This is DS 349. It's a level 600 question.
Okay.
Is the positive two-digit integer n less than 40?
So we know we have a two-digit integer n. So just like a previous question we've done, we represent that with two digits. We can call this t and u again, right? T for tens digit, u for units digit. And so this is kind of what we're given. So this is our g. And we're trying to figure out, our find is n less than 40. So once again, this is a yes or no question. And I'm going to write my A, D, B, C, E up here as well. So if I look at this, there's really nothing for me to simplify. I could represent n as 10t plus u if I wanted to write it out, but there's no indication yet that I need to do that. So you could do it if you want to. You could say n is 10t plus u just to have it written another way. Not sure if it's going to be helpful or not just yet, but there's nothing we can really simplify or reduce or rewrite in any other way. It's just important to understand what we're actually trying to figure out here. So we're trying to figure out this n, this two-digit integer, is it going to be less than 40? Again, yes or no question. All right, so on to the first statement.
The units digit of n is 6 more than the tens digit.
So I translated what Nicole just said into this equation. She said the units digit of n, that's u, is translates to equals. 6 more translates to plus 6. So 6 more than the tens digit, which is what we call t. Units digit of n is 6 more than t. So this is the way I represent the words and translate that into an equation. So with this, what I like to do is make a little table. So I know that for digits, you have to remember that there's only a finite number of digits. So if you think about a digit, what's the lowest possible digit? What's the highest possible digit? Just like alphabets, the lowest alphabet, highest alphabet, or A to Z. There's 26 alphabet. For digits, 0 to 9, there's 10 different digits, 0 to 9. So there's not an infinite number of digits to be working with here. The extreme would be 0 all the way up to 9. So if I look at plugging in a t, solving for u, and then looking at what n represents. So I know that the lowest possible digit is 0. I'll plug in a 0 for t. I don't want to do that because then I'll only have a one-digit value for n. I won't have two digits any longer. So I can't plug in a 0 for t. Otherwise, it goes to one digit. I'll plug in a 1 for t. 1 plus 6 will give me 7 for u. So my value for n will be 17, 1, 7. Okay? So that's a possibility for n. I can also plug in a 2 for t, which means n will be 2 plus 6. I'm sorry, u will be 2 plus 6, which is 8. So n's will be 28. So that's another possibility for n. And in this case, we have yes is less than 40. We have another yes is less than 40. So let's see what happens when we try t to be 3. 3 for t, 3 plus 6 is 9, so u will be 9, and n will be 39. So another yes is less than 40. What happens when we try plugging in t to be 4? 4 plus 6 will give us 10. U cannot be 10 because that is not a single digit. That's two digits, which means if I keep plugging in larger numbers for t, my value for u is going to be over a single digit. So there's only 3 options here, 17, 28, and 39 for n. All 3 options are under 40, so this is sufficient, and I can answer my question. So eliminate B, C, and E. So what I cannot answer is what is the value for n. I don't know the value. I don't know which of these values represents n. I have 3 different options, but what I can answer is that n is absolutely less than 40. So I can answer the question that they're asking us. So that is sufficient. So we're done with statement 1. We're down to 2 choices left, A or D. So now we look at statement 2.
N is 4 less than 4 times the units digit.
So let's write that out. So we have n is, so is means equals. You said 4 less, so that's take away 4, subtract 4 from what?
4 times the units digit.
4 times u. So n equals 4 less, so take away 4 from what? From 4 times units digit. So I have another equation. I've translated words into an equation, so I can build another table. In this case, I have u and I have n. There's no t in the equation here. So I plug in for u and I figure out what n could be. So I could do the same thing. I could start with 0 and work my way up and kind of see what the options are. In this case, I'm going to do it the opposite way. I'm going to start with the largest possible digit in this case, which is 9. I'm going to plug in u to be 9 and see what happens with n. So if I plug in u to be 9, 4 times 9 is 36. 36 minus 4 is 32. That means n is 32. Is that less than 40? Yes, it is. So you know that anything less for u will give a value for n less than 32. So once again, we can answer the question, is n less than 40? Yes, because the largest it can be is 32, which means we choose our answer choice D, which means each of these statements independently is sufficient. We didn't have to look at them together. They're both independent. We can answer the question with both of these separately.
Okay, so we will do one more question, and then I think we're going to have to move on for the sake of time and talk about study planning.
All right.
All right, so the last data sufficiency question is DS 378. It's a low 700s level question.
Okay.
A certain bookcase has 2 shelves of books. On the upper shelf, the book with the greatest number of pages has 400 pages. On the lower shelf, the book with the least number of pages has 475 pages.
Okay, so what I've just done is essentially taken the information that Nicole just gave us and put it in a visual representation. So she said we have 2 shelves. We have an upper shelf, we have a lower shelf, and we have books stacked up on these shelves. So in the upper shelf, the book with the largest number of pages is 400. So I'm going to put that book at the very end because I'm thinking about how I'm going to order these books. I'm going to order the books from least pages to the greatest. So the greatest will be the book that has 400 pages, and that's going to go on the very end of the upper shelf. For the lower shelf, the book that has the least pages is 475, so that goes on the left side. Everything to the right of this will have more pages. So I'm thinking about, knowing that the question's asking about median, we'll see that later on. Asking about the median means putting things in order from least to greatest or from greatest to least. So this way I know that this book is going to be at the very end of the upper shelf, and this book is going to be the very beginning of the lower shelf. Okay? All right, continue.
All right. So what is the median number of pages for all the books on the 2 shelves?
Okay, so we need the median number of pages for all the books on both shelves. All right, so if I want to know the median for all the books on both shelves, I really want to think about combining these 2 shelves together. And I can think about putting them together because I know that these 2 books, if put together on the same shelf, will be right next to each other, because this is going to be the largest pages on the upper shelf. This is going to have the smallest pages on the lower shelf. So I can put the book with 400 pages right next to this book with 475 pages. I'm going to have so many books on the left of that and so many books on the right of that. Okay, so this is the picture where we combine upper and lower into one shelf. We know these 2 books will be right next to each other. So now we're ready for the first statement.
There are 25 books on the upper shelf.
Okay, so we're given that we have 25 books on the upper shelf. That's very helpful information. We know that if this is one of those 25 books, we have 24 books on the left of that book. So we have 24 books on the left of this book. But to figure out the median of what's right in the middle, we have to know what's on the other side. We have to know how many books we have in total. So as of right now, we don't know how many total books we have. We could have 100, 200, 1,000,000 books on the lower shelf. So there's really no way to figure out what's going to be right in the middle. So that's going to be insufficient information. So we can eliminate A and D. Okay, so now we're ready to look at statement 2.
There are 24 books on the lower shelf.
All right, so the lower shelf has 24 books. So when we look at statement 2, we have to look at it by itself. So we have to ignore what we know from statement 1. So we don't know anything about the books on the upper shelf at this point. We just know that we have 24 books on the lower shelf, which means this is one of those 24 books. We have 23 books to the right of that book. So we have 23 books over here, but without the first statement, we have no information about what's going to be on the upper shelf. So again, we don't know if we have 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000,000 books on the upper shelf. That's also insufficient. So we can eliminate choice B. So at this point, we want to consider them together. We combine this information together. If that's enough, we choose C, and if it's not enough, we choose E. So looking at them both together, we know we have 25 books total, so we have this one book plus the 24 books from the upper shelf. We have 24 books total. We have 23 plus this book here for the lower shelf. So the question is, do we know the book that's right in the middle? Can we figure out that book? And if so, we can figure out how many pages it has. So knowing that there's 24 books here and 23 books here, 23 plus 1 makes 24 here. So this is 24, and then this is 24, which means this book right here is the one in the middle. So the answer to our question is the 400 pages. So we are sufficient. We choose choice C, and we're done. We move on.
All right.
So notice that for a lot of these questions, it's about having a visual representation of the problem. I think without a visual, without a table or a chart or a picture of some sort, it may be harder to see sort of when you're sufficient and when you're not sufficient if you don't have a visual. But hopefully I showed you some examples where you can see how to lay out a question, take words, translate into an equation, or take words and translate into a picture, and then using that diagram, that picture, to help you understand and make the next step. We'll be doing a lot of this in the boot camp. If you come to the boot camp on February the 11th, you'll see a lot more of this with different types of questions. So you'll hopefully get trained at how to take a problem, how to translate it correctly, and how to make that visual that helps to lead to the next step and kind of see where to go from that point. Okay.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about building a study plan, how to actually study and prepare for this GMAT. And Stephanie did a great job of working through some of the quantitative examples, which is probably a pain point for a lot of folks out there. I know it is for me. You can obviously go through verbal test questions as well, but we don't have time for that today. So let's just talk a little bit about a study plan. What do you recommend for someone as they decide they're going to take the GMAT? They've set that test score, they're thinking about a date, now what?
Yes, so here you have an image of a study plan, a sample study plan. And this particular study plan is a 30-day plan. So obviously your plan is going to depend on, or 31-day plan. Your plan will depend on how many days you have, how much time you have between now and your test date. So like I said earlier, the first thing you want to do is take a practice test. That's number one. So sometime tomorrow, sometime this week, sit down, give yourself 3 to 4 hours and take that full practice test. I'm telling you that's essential to figure out where your starting point is. Then your second step, like I said earlier, is to go ahead, look online, see what the dates are, just kind of get a feel for when you can take the test, what time of day, what days of the week, etc. And even go so far as to pick a date, put it down. And zone in on it.
Do you think that they should actually go to a test site to take that practice test, or?
Great question. Okay. So you definitely want to get outside of your house, right? You don't want to be home taking your practice test. You want to take yourself to a public library, take yourself to a nice quiet place outside of your home. So I like to say public libraries, even coffee shops if they're not too noisy. You go sit in a coffee shop, but don't take it in a comfortable place. Don't take it sitting on your top of your bed, with the TV on, and definitely don't take it with coffee or water or your phone around, because in the real testing room, there's nothing allowed except for your writing pad and your writing pen, and they also give you some headphones. So you are given headphones you can use to block out any distracting noises around you. So I would put yourself in a situation where you're at a table, it's pretty quiet, or you have some headphones and you can sit in one place for 4 hours with no distractions and go through a practice test. And only in those 2 8-minute breaks can you actually get a drink of water or actually get a snack or something like that, get up and stretch. But pretend like your practice test is the real test as much as possible, and try to put yourself in that same mindset when you go and take your practice test.
So if someone decides, they take the practice test, they get their baseline, they have their target score, they decide, okay, I want to take a course.
Yes.
Do you think that they should do some study beforehand to prepare for the course, or just go to the course and have the course get them to where they need to be?
So I think it go either way. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for that. You can certainly, let's say, look up courses, sign up for a course. It may not start for another 2 or 3 weeks. So in that time, certainly you can be looking at some things and doing some things on your own before you actually start the course. So there's nothing that says you have to wait because your course may not start, tomorrow. So look up courses and figure out what course you want to take. See when it starts, and go ahead and get the official GMAT study guide book, or get some kind of resource where you can start brushing up on grammar rules or brushing up on algebra, brushing up on geometry, and just getting yourself kind of open to even being in the course. Once you get into the course, obviously you'll have they'll give you a schedule, you'll have practice questions and homework assignments and things like that, but you don't have to wait to actually start doing things, wait for the course to start. So I would say start today, start tomorrow, at least with the research part of it, and figuring out what course you do want to take, and when is the registration deadline for the course, how many people can be in the course, what's the cost, kind of, getting yourself into the course is the first step. And then once you're registered and you're in, then yeah, go ahead and do something so that by the time you start your course, you feel ready for the course and you've been doing a little bit of something beforehand. So for the boot camp, just kind of jumping ahead, for the boot camp on February 11th, for those that want to come, this book is required for the boot camp. So if you get the book ahead of time, you start working through problems ahead of time, even if you don't know what you're doing, at least you've seen the questions. You may even have some questions that you want to send me ahead of time to say, hey, please make sure you do this question, right? That's the benefit of looking ahead of time, is that you can kind of pinpoint questions that you want to make sure that I cover in that session. But I think, starting ahead of time will give yourself more time, get yourself more comfortable with the materials and what the expectations are of the course. So there's no reason to wait. I think the time is when you go ahead and make that commitment and you register and you go ahead and lock in the date for the course.
Sure.
Go ahead and get started.
So you've already recommended plan on taking the test more than once, and anyone I've ever talked to, whether it's a test coach or someone in our admissions team, it's the same answer. Just plan on taking the GMAT more than once. Very rarely do you do worse. You almost always do better.
Right.
Is there a difference in the study plan or the prep when you take that first one versus when you prepare again for that second one?
Yes. Okay. So taking the test for the first time, you don't really know. You know what to expect. I can tell you all day and night what to expect. But when but you never experienced it, right? So you have the experience for the first time. You've gone through the course. You've gone through a boot camp. You've gone through some prep. You've gone through the book, etc. I think that you'll have a real good sense after that first test of what else you need to get you to the next, to get you those extra points. So you may say, you know what, I took a course before that was great, but it was too many people. I need something smaller. Or I took a course before and I really just need some one-on-one attention with, hone in on like a certain type of question. So I really want to focus on permutations, combinations, probability. I know that these are the questions that really get me. Or I'm totally fine with problem solving. It's data sufficiency that I can't wrap my mind around. So I really just want to hone in on going through DS type questions. So I think you'll know from the first test to the second test, like you'll have some kind of idea of what more you need to get you to the next level. And I think then you can figure out, okay, what your next steps may be. But this study plan assumes that you haven't taken the GMAT and you need to kind of start from, square one and go through all the different types of questions, all the different concepts, verbal, quant, everything. Then when you get to after you take your first test, you're ready, you're ramping up for your second test, you want to take it and kind of fine tune it to, okay, what do I need to zoom in on based on your first test, and where are my deficiencies, or really maybe somebody else can help you figure that out. If you don't already know yourself, you can try to figure out, what's keeping you back, what's holding you back. What do you need more of? More quant, more verbal, more what? And then, create a different plan to help you get to that next level. But I think to start is more general start, is covering everything, every topic, every concept, every type of question, and having a comprehensive plan in place. And then again, using your baseline and your target scores, practice tests to help you figure that out as well. So after you take the practice test, you'll also have a good sense of like, oh my gosh, like I need a class that's going to really hone in on this or this or this, or I need to make sure I work on this or spend more time on that. So I think you'll have a good understanding of like how you feel about different concepts and different question types just by taking that practice test.
Okay, so last question for you. I'm prepared. I'm sitting down to take the test. It's test day. What tips do you have for me?
Yes, so you're prepared. So first of all, you just know that. So breathe, right? Breathe. The worst thing you can do is get in there and be anxious and, kind of too nervous about it. Just breathe, because if you're prepared and truly prepared, you should be confident. And one thing that I'm going to send you guys after today is a checklist, because I get the question all the time is, how do I know I'm ready? And specifically for the quant section, how do I know I'm ready for the quant section? And I've put together a nice little checklist because I get the question so much. And if you could check off every box on that checklist, you know what ADBCE means. You know how to back solve. You know how to pick numbers. You know how to do certain things. Then you're honestly ready for the test. So this particular sheet I'm going to send you is a checklist on the front side. And one of those things you're going to check off on is you understand the strategies, the quant strategies. And there's roughly, I would say, 20 or so strategies that I recommend that you know. And they're all on the back side of that sheet. And so if you can understand the different strategies on that sheet, and I list out the strategies, I list out a description of the strategies and also a problem from this book that relates to that strategy. So you can kind of go back to if you have the book, you can look at the book and figure out how you can apply the strategy to that problem. If you can go through all of that and check it off. Timing is another key element. I think you want to make sure that with everything you do on the GMAT, you keep a nice Excel spreadsheet and you keep track of really all the questions here in this book and how efficiently and effectively you're answering the questions. So when I'm with students, we create a spreadsheet off the bat. We have all the questions organized in the spreadsheet a certain way by concept. And literally for every question in the book, we have how much time it took to answer the question. You can answer a question correctly, but if it took you 10 minutes, 5 minutes, that's obviously too much time. So you don't want to just go based on, okay, I got that question right. You also want to think about how much time it took you to actually answer it correctly. So if it took you more than that 2 minute, 3 minute kind of time frame, that's a question that you want to think about. Is there another approach to it? Is there a way to save time? Or is it just that I'm still rusty dusty and I need to practice it more to get my timing to the 2 minute mark? So it could mean a couple different things. It could mean you're approaching it a different way and maybe your way is too long or something, or it can mean that you just have to, do that problem 2, 3, 4 times until you can get it right in that 2-3 minute time frame. But that's one of the things that I highly recommend, is that you go through these problems over and over and over and over. Repetition is so important. One time is never enough. It's just like learning a foreign language or something like that. It takes daily practice, routine practice on a daily basis, 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours a day over a period of time to really, get yourself to the point where you feel like you're ready for a test like this. So it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take a lot of repetition to actually get to the point where you feel like you're proficient and you're ready. And at that point, you should be able to check off everything off the list and feel confident that you're walking to the test, as prepared as you possibly can be.
All right, so we've got just 2 minutes, so I'm going to take that time to remind you guys that Stephanie has a GMAT one-day boot camp coming up on Sunday, February 11th. It's going to be here at the Goizueta Business School from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. So it's a boot camp.
It's a boot camp.
It's a boot camp. You can register online at www.mathsp.com. I'm going to send out this slide deck and the entire video that includes Stephanie's contact information and her website. That will all go out to you guys within the next week, so keep an eye out for that. I hope you found this useful and know that we have resources like Stephanie available.
Absolutely.
To get you guys prepared.
It sounds crazy, but I actually love doing this stuff. I've been doing it since I graduated Goizueta in 2008, so a long time now. I've helped many students who start off saying, I will never, do well, or I hate math, or, I've seen kind of everything. I've worked with students of all ages, and, so I've seen things happen. So if you are that person that's just like, oh my gosh, this is too much, or, I'll never get there, first of all, just know that, that's not necessarily true. And if you just need that extra kick, the boost, the GMAT boot camp, no matter where you are in your study, beginning, or you've taken it a couple times, I think that'll be a good place for you to come and get your specific questions answered, or just come and learn from me and learn from each other. Having a study buddy is also really important. So you'll get a chance to meet other people and hopefully walk away with somebody's number that you can connect with and start forming groups together outside of, work and everything to have somebody to keep you accountable. So.
All right, well, that's it. We are out of time. Again, you'll get all this via email. And thanks again, Stephanie, for joining us today.
Thank you.